At its beating green heart, Great Britain is still wild. Step away from the cities and motorways of the modern world, and you'll find a verdant land of deep woods and bleak haunting moors, every single one of which holds its own history, and some of them are truly ancient. Before what we as modern humans would refer to as civilization came to the British Isles, the ancient peoples of England, Scotland, and Wales lived from the land in basic settlements. This was a world of standing stones, hill forts, rituals, and myth. But from the artifacts these people left behind, we can start to unravel their lives and secrets. The ancient peoples of Britain once dominated our landscape. While people commonly settled in forests and woodlands close to rivers and lakes, others took to the highlands of Scotland, living from the mountains and moors. Others took to the fens and wetlands, their foraging and hunting offset by the eerie booming calls of bitterns when the birds were still plentiful in England. Humans thrived in caves, on cliffs, by the seas, and deep within valleys as they steadily built their tribes and settlements from the ground up, developing the basic technologies we take for granted in the modern day. Tribal Britain came to a gradual end with the arrival of the earliest Romans on the islands, between AD 43 to 47, hauling them up from prehistory and launching them into what we formally call history with the introduction of writing and civilization. Today, we will be telling the stories of some of the tribes that lived, grew, and eventually perished in pre-Roman Britain. Stories that take us back to when our islands were very different. We will primarily be focusing on the tribes that lived across Britannia, Cambria, and Caledonia, the Roman names for England, Wales, and then Scotland respectively. It is important, however, to note that the Romans were never particularly successful in conquering Scotland and did not reach far within what is now Wales. Join us as we take you back through time to the Iron Age to meet the ancient tribes peoples that populated Britain before the arrival of the Romans. One of the most widespread tribes in ancient Europe were the Brigantes, a group of people who lived across the north and northeast of England before and as the Romans invaded Britain. Their territory was one of the largest seen in ancient Britain and stretched from what is now Yorkshire to the more northerly shires of Northumberland and Durham, with segments of Lancashire also falling under their domain. These people lived within the Pennines, a range of uplands that are mainly dominated by moors, dales, and steep rock faces. It is unknown how they rose to power or how long they were around before the Romans arrived, but they are thought to have been an impressive military force. They are known to have entered an uneasy alliance with the Romans, and the Brigantes' king and queen, Venutius and Cartimandua, advised the Romans against their conquest of Wales in 47 AD. The king and queen later separated, and Venutius turned on Cartimandua and the Romans, whom she remained loyal to. Venutius was quickly defeated on his first attempt, but was able to take his kingdom back in 69 AD, when Roman control of Britain had become more unstable. Amidst the Brigantes' cities and towns were the settlements that are now known as York, Ilkley, Aldborough, Catterick, Binchester, and Alston, amongst others. They were bordered by tribes that may have been subsections of the Brigantes, these being the Carvetti, centered in Carlisle, the Textoverdi in Lancashire, and the Lopocares in the wider reaches of Northumberland. Perhaps the most well-known tribe to have inhabited Britannia were the Iceni, who lived in what is now Norfolk as we travel south from the lands of the Brigantes. When they were taken over by the Romans, their people became more unsettled over time, with the harsh Roman influence on their culture and ways of life. King Prasutagus of the Iceni managed to lead his people to independence in a revolt from 47 AD until his death in 60 AD, after which the Romans were able to take advantage of the kingdom's vulnerability and reinforce their rule. The late king's wife, Boudica, took the reins where her husband had left off, launching a huge revolt that would go down in history. Boudica's forces posed a serious threat to Roman control as she stormed and burned several major cities, settlements that are now referred to as St. Albans, Colchester, and even the mighty city of London, throwing the Romans off course and leaving them with a nasty wound. Things were looking up for Iceni liberty until the Battle of Watling Street at an unknown location in central southern England. Armed with swords and tall oval shields, but no armor, Boudica's men raced to the Roman army, who had positioned themselves in a narrow passageway between the hills. Boudica outnumbered the Romans, but it was no use. Their wedge-shaped formation and advanced weapons and armor cut through them quickly. While 80,000 Britons lost their lives that day, only 400 Romans were killed. It is unknown how Boudica died, but she didn't last long after her defeat. Some sources claimed she poisoned herself to avoid capture, where others state she died from natural sickness. Southern England was populated by an array of agricultural communities, some of which would quickly fall to the Romans when their military efforts proved unsuccessful. One such tribe was the Dobuni, who lived in the regions of modern-day Gloucestershire, Somerset, Herefordshire, Warwickshire, and Wiltshire. Their communities were small, and they were not a particularly militaristic power, instead favoring technological advancements in farming and quickly adopting the Roman laws and ways of life when they took over. To the southeast of England lived the Belgic tribes, peoples such as the Cantiaci, Belgae, Trinovantes, and the Catuvellauni. These people existed not only in England, but on the other side of the English Channel, stretching across what would one day become parts of France, Belgium, Germany, and more. Many of these people are thought to have come to Britain via Belgium and France, settling in southern England as early as the 2nd century BC and spreading out east and north across the island. Some of these tribes, such as the Catuvellauni, are known to have fiercely resisted the Roman conquest when it reached what is now Bedfordshire in 43 AD, temporarily holding them back before succumbing to their advanced forces. Some Belgic tribes, such as the Trinovantes, participated in and were ultimately defeated after Boudica's infamous revolt. While we use the term Cambria to separate Wales from England in this video, it is important to note that around the same time the Romans invaded, Wales was still referred to as Britannia, included with England. One of the most prominent tribes of ancient Wales were the Silures, who lived across the southwest of the region in hill forts and small agricultural communities. They're thought to have been a big confederation of smaller tribes, rather than one individual group of peoples, and were actually one of the few groups of ancient Welsh peoples who were conquered by the Romans. There are conflicting views as to how this happened. While some claim that the Silures were defeated by the Roman general Sextus Julius Frontinus in his 78 AD campaign, others state that they eventually came to terms with the Roman presence in the region and were assimilated into the empire peacefully. The latter seems to be the most reliable outcome of the two. One Welsh tribe that certainly did resist the Romans violently were the Ordovicus, who lived on the other side of the region to the Silures, towards the northwest coast of Wales. After several attempts to claim Ordovicus land as their own, the Romans were finally able to put their rebellion down in 50 AD at the bloody Battle of Caer Caradoc. They were led by a king known as Caractacus, who prior to the Roman invasion spent a lot of time expanding his tribe's borders and gained vast amounts of new territory for the Ordovicus. He was well prepared for an invasion, but ultimately could not resist the immaculate organization and training of the Roman armies. After almost 10 years of violent guerrilla warfare against the legions, his armies fell at Caer Caradoc, and the Brigantes' queen, Cartimandua, still allied to the Romans, turned him in when he fled to the north of England. Initially sentenced to death, he was reportedly charismatic enough to persuade Roman Emperor Claudius to spare his life. It is not known what became of him after this. Due to the fact that Caledonia, the mountainous land of what would one day become Scotland, was never conquered by Roman forces, we actually know surprisingly little about them. While the peoples of England and Wales were fighting the Romans in their vast plains and valleys, the ancient Scots were to an extent safe. Not only were they further away physically from the direction the Romans were attacking, but their lands were composed of a plethora of natural barriers. Mountains, crags, wetlands, hills, and forests are not easy terrain to fight battles in, and resistance from the native peoples of Scotland was much more fierce than the Romans were expecting when they first arrived. Moreover, in comparison to England and Wales, the Romans did not think that there was enough money to be made from Scotland to justify the difficulties of conquering it. By the time they reached Scotland, the Romans were a long way from home, and resources were beginning to thin as more and more money was sent from Rome to fund the conquests in Britain. To conquer Scotland was as undesirable to the Romans as it was difficult. Once the Romans had established their rule in Britain, they built 2 walls to keep the Caledonian tribes away from their lands. The Antonine Wall, from the Firth of Forth to the Firth of Clyde, and Hadrian's Wall, which stretches from the east coast of northern England to the west coast. All of this being said, several Scottish tribes were mentioned in Roman texts, even if only briefly, over the time that the conquests were taking place. Many of these tribes are only ever mentioned once in Ptolemy's Geographica, which lists several of the groups of peoples of ancient Scotland and where they lived. From the writing, we can discern that Scotland was populated by the Caereni and the Smertai in Sutherland, the Carnonici in Ross-shire, the Creonis near the islands of Mull and Skye, the Epidi on the island of Islay, the Lugi on the coasts of Moray Firth, the Selgovi in Dumfriesshire, the Venicones in Montefieth, and the Carnovi in Caithness, right on Scotland's northernmost tip. The people of ancient Scotland are often referred to by the Romans collectively as Picts or Celts. The Picts were described by the Romans to paint or tattoo their bodies with intricate swirling patterns and symbols. Like many of the British tribes of the ancient world, they were known to construct stone circles or megaliths, typically sites of spiritual significance and ritual practice. They carved these stones with the same unique patterns as their tattoos and body paint, and many carvings can still be seen etched into the ancient rocks to this day. While there is much left to learn about the ancient tribes of Britain, there are still chances to uncover information across archaeological dig sites that are continuously ongoing in the United Kingdom. As recently as January 2024, archaeologists operating on the A417 motorway near the town of Cheltenham managed to uncover an Iron Age burial site, adorned with the skulls and bones of animals, with facilities in place for crafting and metallurgy. Ceremonially placed skeletons have been uncovered in crouching positions here, which, when studied in further detail, could teach us a lot more about how these people lived before the Romans traveled across the Channel to conquer their lands. While the Romans can teach us a lot about their views and the military conquests of the people of Britain, many more secrets remain hidden in the earth for modern humans to see for themselves. Perhaps in time, we will be able to paint a fully accurate picture of what life was like for these long-lost tribes of our ancient island.